Hello and welcome back to another Oats video. This time we are getting into a second bit of Build a Web App with Oats, and we're going to look at practically how to start an Oats app and how to finally get the application running in your web browser. Now, I'd already written this article a while back, so I'll be going through it while doing everything, explaining everything on video and doing a bit of it practically. So let's get started. Now, I'll be referring to the previous video where we did the starter project and I showed you how you can set up an Oats environment. Now, if you don't remember it, you can just go to that video shortly. It will just take you about 2 minutes and you'll be able to set up a starter project. You just have to run this command here in px.ccli, the folder you want to install the starter project. And then if you want to view how the starter project looks like, you can run npm run dev. Now, as far as starting an Oats app is concerned, the file that you're going to look at referencing from the starter project will be the index.js file. Now, coming to where I had installed it previously, I'm going to source app index scripts index.js. Now, right here is where we start an Oats app. And how we do that simply is that we provide a function, like here I've got this function called init app, where now I will call this Oats function called init app from approach.init app, and then all this will initialize and start our Oats app in the browser once the browser gets our script file or loads our script file. Now, what happens here basically is we have this approach class, which essentially is exported as a singleton that contains this primary method, the init app method, where we're able now to start our Oats app and provide this method with several arguments that will allow our app to run correctly. Now, if you look at our example right here, we have our init app method where we passed an instance of the app state manager, an instance of the main router, and then this is an approach view object. I'll explain that later, and then a default route, which we don't have any for now. Now, let's start with the app state manager. The app state manager is simply a class that manages routing states in Oats, that allows Oats specifically to understand, to make better use of the history API and understand when you've pressed the forward or back button in the browser and be able to break that down to whether it's a forward movement in the path or a back movement in the path. Now, the history API doesn't make this quite obvious, so that's why we need this class right here to do that for us. You don't have to implement it or anything, you just have to provide its instance, like in the starter project example. Just call new app state manager and then you pass the app routing info. I'll get to that in a bit. Now, the other instance that you pass is the main router instance. The main router instance is now what handles actual routing in Oats. You'll just create a new instance, and then to it, just like here in the example, just call new main router, and then we'll pass our app routing info, which is basically the routing information, the array of routing informations that basically contain all the valid routes for the app, and then an instance of the app state manager, and then right here, this is just an error callback. Just come to the article, just break it down nicely. Just have an error callback, which will tell us in case there's a problem when there's a problem with routing. And then you can just handle anything here. You can implement it or fail to implement it, there's no problem. And then we have a route path, which I haven't provided any in the starter project. But where this comes useful is where, let's say, for instance, you have you're using Oats in your admin side, and your admin is accessed by let's say your URL example.com/admin. Now your routes will basically follow here. Now instead of having to type in your routing info for every route admin./my route 1, and then I have to do again for my other routing info admin/my route 2. You can just pass the route path here as /admin, and then now you'll specify your routes as my route 1, just my route 2. So it's just helping you get rid of this redundancy, and just have a simpler way of expressing your routes. Now finally, you have the route consent callback. That's another argument that we pass to our init app, and the purpose of this callback is this one right here. You can see get our URL that you're trying to route to, and then now we return whether we can access and a fallback route. Now where this can help you is if you take our example where you're using admin, and let's say we'd come from the normal route example.com, and then the user is supposed to log in and access the admin panel. Now, in case they want to directly access their admin panel /route 1, let's say that, and they are yet to log in, you can check right here whether the right user is accessing the right route, and if not, you can just pass can access to false, and Oats will automatically reject that routing. So there's a little bit of user access control with the web app. Now, we can now talk about the app route view object, and it's this one right here. Where you can see there's a template, and I've passed null, and then there's the main nav infos, and I've passed the app main nav info. So let me explain what each is. Now, if you go back to the example that we had in the previous video, I talked about how Oats segregates its views. We'll have the app route view, which is essentially the view of the app the web app that will never change. Most of the time, this may be your main navigation and something of that sort. And then we have your fragments, which are now the bits of your web app that will change based on the route. Now, when you want to specify your app route view, you can do this in two ways. You can either specify it when you're initializing your app, of which will pass the template here, which is basically be a HTML string. You can see it accepts a string, or you can do it directly in the HTML file that will be delivered by the server. In our case, it will be the home.sv.hbs file. This is what will eventually come to the dist folder as the home.hbs file. You see, it's the same file as far as markup is concerned. The only difference is now finally in the distribution folder, Webpack has automatically injected our index.js file. We call it the index.devbundle.js file. This is this same file. Now, the app route starts here with this tag, app route, and ends here when you close the app route tag. Now, whatever we specify here, except for what is inside the main fragment, this content right here, except for this content, whatever we specify here is the app route view. And this is essentially bits of the app that will never change. Now, let me run the startup project so that I can just use a practical example. Right there, so I'm going to do run dev for that to build. Okay, so now we've gotten our start a project running, just show it in the browser at localhost 80. Now, here's our starter project, and if we look at our home.sv.hbs file, specifically the app root view, this view right here, you can see he's specified our nav, our navigation, and our site background, which in our case, this is our navigation right here. We have home and about, and then there are these faint rings, or rather the Oats logo right here in the background. That will never change as you're navigating. You can say go to about, that still remains. Go to home, that still remains. There's no need for Oats to re-render that, so it comes, it's specified in the app root view. Now, basically, if I were to if you are not to specify this right here, if this was not to exist, I would have instead supplied it as the template right here. I could have either used require to get my file as a HBS file, or I could have just quite practically, because it doesn't have any templating within it, could have just practically used the backticks and just done this, and Oats will still be able to load it. Now, in our case, we just passed null for our starter project because we have already specified it in the HTML file that will be loaded from the server. So Oats doesn't have to reattach the app root view. Now, the next value that we pass in our app root view object is the main nav infos. And how the main nav infos work is basically, if you look at our starter project, you can see when you navigate to about, the styling for about has changed. And also, Oats was able to intercept the click on about and navigate to our about URL. And then you go back to home. Oats was able to intercept the click right here, navigate us to the home route, which is this, and render the right fragment for that. Now, normally you'd have to write boilerplate code that will attach listeners to this to your navigation buttons or links, and then trigger routing manually into all this, and try to style your links, navigation links or buttons based on which one is active. Now, Oats handles all that boilerplate for you. All you have to do is to supply the app main nav info, which is basically, let me just open this, which is basically an array of navigation infos that take this form. And what basically you supply to Oats is a selector, which is a dot selector, basically like a class name that you've given your navigation link or button. And then you specify the default route, which is the default route Oats will route to when the navigation button or link with this selector is clicked. And then the base active route is now the route that Oats will assume this navigation link is still active whenever we are routing the app. So for instance, if I didn't have any other navigation link, I just had my home link, so this didn't exist. And then in my routing info, let me now just open the routing info because that will be relevant to this to the whole conversation now. And then I had the home route and I had the about route. Now Oats would assume that even when I'm in the about route, the home link or the navigation button or link with this home link class selector will still be active, because that it starts that route, or the route about starts with this. It starts with the slash, which is the base active route. But now we obviously have about link, navigation link, that routes us to a completely different view, and that is now provided as a separate navigation info. It's about link selector. Just inspect this so that you see how the selectors look like. So you can see how it's in class you have that about link selector, which is what you have here. And then when you click on that, Oats knows it's supposed to navigate to about, and also it should always be active for any route that starts with about. And then yeah, that's the final thing that's applied. Now upload view object, and then finally we supply a default route, and we'll show this more practically later. But basically what the default route does is, if, let's say for instance, someone is accessing our website for the first time and they use the URL, the direct home URL. Now, when Oats loads, what it tries to do is to first resolve the URL that the web app has been loaded into. And it's going to look at its app routing info, which now let me explain in more detail what that contains. So it just contains our route. First, it specifies the route, and then it provides a target, which is the main fragment that the view rendering should start. And then the nested child fragments are the child fragments that we should render in order after we render the main fragment. So if I may use this example that you have right here, our starter project, when we navigate to home, or even we load to home, the app loads from at home, we will start rendering from the home main fragment, and that will load this view right here. And if we were to have, let's say, another view that was right underneath, navigate to underneath this, if you had another view right here that was nested within, would have that view rendered as a child fragment. We'll just write a child fragment, and then we'll supply it right here as an array. We'll just take that and then have a child fragment be the one, and if you had another one nested inside, we'll have another child fragment builder 2. And child fragment builder 2 doesn't necessarily have to be nested within this child fragment builder 1. It can just it can still be nested within the home main fragment. But what it means at the end of the day is, this is the main fragment. This is where we start our view rendering, and then we render these other views in this order. Now, having shown you how the app routing info looks like, we can go back to index and now talk about this default route. Because now what the default route does is, coming back to our example here, now we could start at right here at home and have this view loaded. But if you wanted to change that and you wanted our app, instead of starting there, to start at home, the problem with doing this is, you can just show it practically. The problem with doing this is, when the app loads at localhost 8080, Oats tries to find the route within its routing info, within this routing info. Oats tries to find a route that matches home, like we had before. But you shouldn't find any, because you've updated that to /home. Now, because there won't be any match, and Oats tries to find a fallback through our default route, and it doesn't find that, it finds that you haven't specified any default route, it just fails completely. The web app fails completely to initialize because there's no routing info that matches the route that the web app has been loaded into from the server. Now, how you correct that is I come here and specify my default route as home. Now, what Oats will do is when the web app loads, you can see already the web app dev server refreshed. Oats is about to pick that up. And you can see instead of loading at localhost 8080, you're initially loading at localhost 8080/home. Now, you may attempt to refresh localhost 8080 again, and then you see what Oats will do. Oats will change that route to home. And that's because we've specified that whenever the app loads, and it loads from an address that is not specified within its app routing info, or a path that is not specified within its app routing info, it will now default to this route right here. And that's exactly what it has done. Now, if I can now try to reverse whatever was there, and now change this back to home as it was, you can see Oats fails again, because now it attempts to refresh the same page which was at home. It loads that from the server, tries to find a routing info specified with home, it finds none, tries to fall back to the default route. We specify the default route as home, it will still find none, and it will fail completely. It will not launch the web app at all. But now if you were to change this, we're still at home. So when we'll save our file, webpack dev server will load at this address. But now I'll want Oats to change that to this, so that you're able to load back here. If I'm going to save it, you notice that webpack dev server refreshes and you're back to localhost 8080. And even if I was to retry home, it will fall back to will fall back to this route and not home. Now I can change this obviously to about, as long as it's a route that is within my routing info. And when I hit save, this will work. But because this home is specified in the routing info, so Oats has no problem routing to that, because it's a valid route for the web app. But if I were to try home, which is definitely not a valid route, we will go to about instead. So the default route can view it as a fallback route. But if you know your app will always load from a valid route from the server, and you don't have to have a fallback, you can just leave that blank, and that will be okay. Now, we also have these extra options right here. I can just add that to the starter project. And what these extra options gives us is that it allows us to provide a link interceptor, which is basically a function, or an object rather, that allows us to intercept non-local clicks or links. Now, if it's in this example, I have these links right here. I have my GitHub link, I have my npm link. If I was to tell Oats to intercept non-local, and then provide an interceptor callback, which will give us the external URL. Now, this interceptor callback will allow us to, let's say, we'll show alert. Get external URL, and then I'll just return false so that you don't navigate there. But what that will make Oats do is that if I were to click on this link, I'm able to intercept external links that navigate the user out of the app, out of the web app. Now, there's something optional that you can do. It just allows you to make sure you have a decent control of content that is within your web app and navigations that the user can make to external links. So let's say it can allow you to just capture some dangerous websites and just craft a user experience and the content management nicely. Now, let's say I got my alert, it was able to intercept that, but we won't be able to navigate there because I returned false. The interceptor refused the routing, but if I want to return true, I'm to click on it, it navigates after the alert. Now, there's something extra that you can just pass to Oats when you are setting up your when you are starting your Oats web app, and it will just allow you to craft your user experience well. And as far as starting an Oats app is concerned, this is just everything that you need to know. You just need to remember that the code will always look something like this. Always, there's nothing new. You'll just import this uproot instance, it's a singleton instance, call its init app function, pass the app state manager, of which will create an instance of the app state manager by just calling new app state manager. You'll get this import, and then pass it the app routing info. Showing you the app routing info is basically just routing information for an Oats web app, and it contains the route that this specific information should navigate to, its target, which is basically the main fragment where the view rendering should start, and then nested child fragments, which are basically nested views within the main fragment that should be rendered in order. It's an array, and whatever is supposed to be rendered should be given in order. And then yeah, for the main router, for in init app, after passing the instance of the app state manager, passing the instance of the main router, pass to it the app routing info, which I've just shown you what it is. We'll create our own app routing infos practically, starting from the next video. And then you'll pass in your app state manager instance again, and then this is you pass in a callback where you'll be able to, let's say, intercept like complete routing fails and show a message to the user or anything of that sort. Pass in a root path, explain what the root path is. Pass in your link interceptor, not link interceptor, but basically a callback that will allow you to grant access, to fine grain how you grant access to specific routes. Then pass in your app route view object, specify a default route, then specify your link interceptor, which is what you had here. And basically that's it. So this is the last video. We're just going to run through code that was from the starter project. From the next video, you're actually going to write our own projects from scratch, and now you'll be able to build with Oats. You're going to init the app. We're going to start an Oats app. We're going to specify fragments. Like, you can just look at how this looks like. You can specify a fragment. We're going to specify a routing info. We're going to specify our nav info and all that, and just build an actual Oats app. If you love the work, leave a like, leave a subscribe. There are links to the open source code You can have a look at them. There are also support links in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.